On this episode of Ideas, I talk with Neil Pasricha about his book, The Happiness Equation. We discuss his personal journey to finding happiness, how to sell more books, what success really is, what most people regret at the end of their lives, and much more. Neil's a great person. He's got a great podcast, blog, books, and I would have to say that his book on happiness might be the best I've read, and I've read a lot on the subject. So make sure to pick up this book. Read it, change your life. I'm not kidding. I'm not just saying that. And take a listen to this podcast. All right, here we go. All right, today's guest is Neil Pasricha. He serves as the director of the Institute for Global Happiness after a decade running leadership development inside Walmart. He is one of the world's leading authorities on happiness and positivity, and he's here today to talk about his New York Times bestselling book, The Happiness Equation. A terrific book it is. Neil, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Adam. Thanks so much for having me.
And you know what I appreciate about you is in the pre-interview, it just felt like a normal conversation. And thank you for that. And I wanted to ask you about the happiness equation first. I read that 1 million copies sold collectively out of all your books. And I think this will be really helpful for listeners, a lot of business people in this listenership, and then also a lot of people who want to write books. But how do you sell 1 million copies of books, Neil?
That is a great opening question.
Straightforward question.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate it. Okay, here's what you do.
Okay.
First of all, you have a tremendous amount of luck and timing. So let's just add those. I want to make sure that those two gigantic arrow vectors are pointed firmly at the answer to this question, so we know that everything I'm about to say is underneath the gigantic umbrellas of luck and timing. Okay. So that's because like, let's just remember, I'm writing about positivity, right? The book of awesome, the happiness equation. What's the world look like over the past 10 years? Well, from a lot of people's perspective, it's been horrible. There's been a massive worldwide economic recession. There's been huge kind of like weather calamities. There's been depending on what side of the fence you're on, like massive political issues that have really affected you negatively. So all I'm trying to say is when you're writing about positivity, like the luck and the timing kind of injected themselves into the books. So start with that.
Okay.
But that's a really nice pat answer. Your listeners are really, I'm sure they're like, that's nice, but like literally, how do I do it, buddy? Like literally break it down. Okay, I'm going to tell you a bunch of stuff that I do that I don't see anyone else do. Okay. So this is, I think, the wheat from the chaff thing, because I don't want to just tell you like, do this, do that, go on the Today Show and do all that. I have all that stuff, but I'm going to tell you the things I do that no one else does. Okay. So here they are. Number one, you need to develop a way that you sign your own book that is creative, different, and interesting. I learned this from Frank Warren, who does postsecret.com. He got a special stamp. He uses only a silver Sharpie. He like makes it a memorable experience. Similarly, when I got my book signed by David Sedaris, he like takes time to chat with you and like writes does a little drawing. So I like bought rainbow colored Sharpies and I like got some stamps made from Staples, and I make it an event. It's not a signed book. It's not a thing. It's an event. So whenever I give a speech, for example, and there's me, and I won't name names, but like there's two other authors who are much larger than me, like they're bigger name people, way bigger than me. I'm the one with the lineup. They don't have any lineup. People just like grab one and leave and say hi. But I have like a 4-hour lineup. Because everyone gets a personal conversation, they get a personal note, they have a connective tissue with me. And that to me is very important because I'm trying to develop a relationship with a reader. And that reader is someone who's going to talk about my book, bring it to their book club, bring it to their office, buy it for their CEO, and spread the book around. But I only get to talk to them. I don't get to talk to the 100 people they talk to. And they get to say, I had a really nice chat with Neil. And you know what? He talked to me about my sister's depression. And it turns out that he had an idea and we really shared about this. And he wrote in my book, like, good luck helping your sister. She's lucky to have you. And like whatever it was, no one I know does, like, I stole it from Frank Warren, but like I hardly ever see an author invest in the signing. Okay. Now, that's one thing. The second thing I'll say is whenever you're in a different city, say you're there for a speaking event, say you're there on a personal vacation, say you're there because you are on a work trip, extend your trip by an extra 24 hours and make a point of visiting every single bookstore that you can possibly get to.
Hmm.
Introduce yourself to the staff, sign every single copy of your book, give them stickers or bookmarks about your book if you have them, and make a point of spending that extra day. So often I had a business trip on a Friday, say in Edmonton, Alberta. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, instead of coming home Friday night, I'll just come home Saturday night. I rent a car. I look it up on the map. There's 13 bookstores in town. I go to every single one of them on Saturday morning, introduce myself. And you know what? This is going to sound funny, Adam, but like I have probably, I don't know, 5 to 10 speaking engagements a year now in Edmonton, and I think it's because of that one Saturday I spent there 10 years ago.
Whoa.
Because
Huh.
that meant every single one of the 13 bookstores featured my book, had signed by author stickers about it, had staff buzzing and talking about it. Um, so that took the whole city and every place they got books. If you went to a bookstore, they found out about the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I'm using Edmonton as an example, but I did that in every city I went to. I did that in Seattle. And then I also looked for, whenever I was staying an extra day, I looked for where else do authors speak? And if it's like at the local YMCA or if it's at the local, independent bookstore, I would ask before I went. I was like, hey, if I stay Saturday, can I do a talk there? And they'd all say, sure, because no one does that. So then I do a talk, and sure, 50 people come. But guess who they are? They're the 50 people that run book clubs. They're the 50 people that are known in their community as the people that read the most. So they tell everyone about your book. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The third thing I'll say, and this is the third one that I'll just give you three. I got like millions of these things, but we can do a whole podcast on this if you
Yeah.
want. But the third thing is, I was always watching my website traffic. So on my blog, 1000awesomethings.com, which was the precursor to my first book, The Book of Awesome. For listeners that may not know, and that's probably most of them, 10 years ago, my life turned upside down in a week. My wife left me, and my best friend very sadly took his own life. And my only salvation from that was writing an awesome thing a day on my blog called 1000awesomethings.com. The blog hit 50 million people. It took off. It won the Webby Award for Best Blog in the World a couple of years in a row. And that turned into the Book of Awesome. So yes, the Book of Awesome was succeeding on a big traditional media campaign and a TED Talk that came out right at the same time and a blog that had readership. But here's one thing I did. Every single day I went to my blog stats. And for anyone that runs a blog, you know that you can see where your traffic's coming from. But what I would do is I would comb down the list and I would look for the places that were sending me like one hit, like literally one or two hits. And you know what they usually were? They were usually some tiny radio station in the middle of nowhere because the host on the air mentioned it or whatever, like at the morning host in Milwaukee or whatever. And what I would do is I would then spend probably an hour a night reaching out to every single place that mentioned me, every blog, every radio station, whatever, and I'd offer to do for them, if they wanted me to, a radio or an email interview for their listeners or their viewers. So they already were loving, like they already liked me enough to talk about me on the air or talk about me on their blog. So then when I reach out personally and say, thank you so much for talking about me on your radio station or blog, would you like to do an email interview together or would you like to do a call-in interview together? It's like 100% say yes. Okay? It's not like pitching. I'm not like saying, hey, can you feature me in this magazine? It's like they already like me.
Yeah.
Right. So I chased those little 1 and 2 hits a day on my blog I kind of climbed up the vine, and guess what? It turned into a real hit. Like it turned into a real conversation. And all this little stuff I'm talking to you about, Adam, like the visiting bookstores, the offering to do free talks, and the radio stations and stuff. Most people would roll their eyes and say, well, what kind of person like literally spends all these hours? But what I would say is two things happen. One, remember, I had just lost a marriage and I'd lost my best friend. I was looking for connection. I was looking for ways to connect with people. And all this helped me understand my own work, my own art, and my ability to communicate it because I was practicing. I was practicing everywhere, right? Like I'm practicing how to talk about my blog and how to talk about my books. And and with no risk. So it also made me more confident to now today I can give 50 speeches a year, and I'm writing a book every 2 years because of all that practice time and for years leading up to it. So that's how you sell 1 million books.
That's all really useful advice, and I'm going to take some of that for myself. But there's a few things from that I want to ask. And do you look at metrics as much now as you did then? What's your take on metrics?
I hate metrics, and no, we shouldn't be looking at them because
Okay.
I'll tell you what, 10 years ago, nobody even knew the word algorithm. That wasn't even a word,
Yeah.
right? That wasn't even a word anyone used. And now it's like, how do you perfect your website for the Google algorithm? How do you get higher in search rankings? How do you analyze your stats and crunch your numbers and look at the big data? You know what we're forgetting? The forest for the trees. What we're doing is we're analyzing data so much. We're torturing data until it confesses. But what we're not doing is thinking about what beautiful thing in the world do I want to create? What ugly
Hmm.
thing do I want to make beautiful? And that is the large macro sense of life. We're on the planet for 30,000 days. Okay, that's it. That's all you got. You're dead for millions of years. You'll be dead for millions of more. You got 30,000 days here. That's it. So, in order to use your life most productively, I think you need to be spending your time not staring at numbers and figuring out how to get an extra hit, but you actually need to be thinking inside your heart, what is it that gives me the most joy? And you talked about the pre-call. Like one area that you and I have connected with, Adam, is that like neither of us purposely puts any ads, commercials, sponsors, or promotions of any kind on our podcasts, because for both of us they're a piece of sacred art that we create because we want to, and that's beautiful. That's the way it should be.
Yeah. That was an early on commitment, and if I commit to something, I'm dang sure going to try to stick to that commitment.
Yeah, but can I zoom out a little bit, because we had this
Yeah.
nice chit chat just now? But what I'd say is, like, zooming out to the happiness equation, like the book, or to the podcast. What I would say is I think of success as a triangle. There's
Okay.
three kinds of success. There's sales success, social success, and self success. So it's nice that I just went on a big rant about self success. Like I went on a big rant about how you got to follow your heart and your art, and that's self success. That's doing it because you want to. That's building the deck in your backyard. That's baking a cake for your kid at school. That's self. Social success is when you want to become on the front of the industry magazine. You want to get your book reviewed in the New York Times Book Review. You want to win an award, for your achievement, or be recognized by the CEO. That's social success, success amongst your peer group. And then there is sales success. That
Hmm.
is commercial success, and that is you wanting to sell a lot of books, which I admit 10 years ago, that was like literally I was focused on it, much more so than I am now. But what I will say is I totally get that too, because, it's a very rational thought to say, well, I'd like to have enough resources to continue to provide for my family and to live a life that I want to live. So I'm not poo-pooing on people that are obsessed with numbers. What I'm saying is, of the three edges of that triangles, self, social, and sales, just make sure that for each project you enter into, you pick the way you're going to measure the success first.
It's really good. And also from that initial conversation about selling 1 million copies is something that struck me was the likability factor. And I wanted to ask you, how much of that likability do you think contributed to your success? And is that, can people build that? Because your success at Walmart, you said your success with bookstores. I mean, just my initial conversation with you, we've never talked before, but it feels like I've known you for a while. Um, there is some sort of likability factor. And I just wanted to talk to you about that. Do you think that's, I mean, you've studied happiness. Do you think that's your happiness, joy showing through, and that's what makes you likable? Or is there some sort of likability factor other than that at work here?
First of all, I've never got this question before, ever, in over a thousand interviews.
Huh.
But I will say a couple things.
Okay.
One is, I don't know if that's true. First of all, if you go on Goodreads or you go on Amazon, I can point out many people that don't like me. So let's just be clear. Like the people are like, this stuff, the Book of Awesome is trite. It's annoying. It's saccharine. It's just bleaching the English language, I believe was one of the reviews. So
Wow.
so let's be clear. Okay, it's not possible. And by the way, if you look at the biggest authors in the world, I mean, say even if we stick to nonfiction, you look at Tim Ferriss, you look at Malcolm Gladwell, you look at Brené Brown or Gretchen Rubin or Simon Sinek, you'll find haters there too, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
nobody's universally likable, okay? But if you want to dig into that a bit more, all I live is by one big adage, which is I ask a million questions because I'm super curious about how things work. Like
That's
how
it.
you're a
Yeah.
real estate agent, like how does that work? How do you make money? How what do you do? And then, but at the same time, I also reveal everything about how about myself. And so
Mm-hmm.
like it can be off-putting when people realize I'm going to ask them questions, but then it's very, I guess, likable when people ask me. They're like, "How does it work for book royalties?" I'm like, "Oh, it's easy. $3 for hardcover, $1 for paperback." They're like,
Mm.
"Really?" And then they're like, "Well, what about literary agent?" I thought, yep. They're like, "Yep, you do. They take 15%." And people are like, "Oh, no one's ever told me that before." Like this person's trying to be a writer for 20 years, and no one ever told them that literary agents take 15%. No one ever told them that you go to agentquery.com to find a literary agent. There's all the literary agents. There's all the
Mm-hmm.
web. You know, mail them, and then no one told them that you make three. Like I can tell you so quickly stuff that takes years to learn just by asking and sharing. So I just want to share everything, and then it lets reason I share so much is because it gives me permission to ask.
And your curiosity, I mean, that just keeps coming up on shows as I talk to people. I mean, that's why I do this show and bring people like you on here is I'm just curious about what people like you are thinking about, what you're doing. Also, what brought you, I guess we should talk about the book at some point, the happiness equation. What brought you to that point to say, I am going to devote my life to happiness? Have you always been a happy person?
No,
Was it because you struggled with depression that you wanted to figure out how happiness worked? Or did
no.
you just see this large void of happiness in the world? What
Keep
did that look like?
Neither, none of the above.
Okay,
Okay,
all
yeah,
right.
okay, it's a good. Well, hopefully, there's a section part D on this question. None of the
Yeah,
above.
yeah, yeah.
Here's what I say is, I went over it really quickly, but really, I worked at Walmart for 10 years. Okay, I worked up the corporate ladder. I have an MBA from Harvard. I was a corporate guy working as director of leadership development in the world's biggest corporation. Okay, so on the side, when my marriage crumbled and when I lost my best friend, I started this blog. The blog got really popular, 1000awesomethings.com. It got a lot of hits, got a lot of attention. It spawned I think 3 or 4 book deals like almost immediately. So
Hmm.
I had this massive pop. I had my 15 seconds of fame. That came around 2010, 2011, 2012. Okay, so that's where I told you I was sticking around in Edmonton over a weekend to sign books. I was like hanging out in Seattle and doing talks at the like YMCA. Like that's where those years came from. Okay,
Hmm.
then guess what? After living downtown by myself for a few years, working on my blog outside of my Walmart job, I eventually met somebody new. And her name was Leslie. She's a teacher here in Toronto, Canada. We fell in love. A year later, we moved in together, and a year later, I asked her to marry me.
Hmm.
On the flight home from our honeymoon, on the flight home from our honeymoon, she told me, she said, I'm pregnant on the
Hmm.
plane. So she on the layover home from our honeymoon, we had a stopover in Malaysia, and she said she wasn't feeling well, so she went to the pharmacy, and then I without me knowing, she bought a pregnancy test. She did the pregnancy test on the airplane in the airplane bathroom again. And then she came back to our seats. We're literally above the clouds, like on a 12-hour flight home. And she says, I'm pregnant on the plane. Like we have a
Hmm.
selfie on the plane of us holding this pregnancy test. And so that's when it hit me, Adam. I was like, oh no, what if this plane crashes? Like I will have no way to suddenly, like literally over like in 1 second, I suddenly felt responsible for the happiness of somebody else, my unborn child. And so for the next 9 months, I wrote a 300-page letter to my unborn child on how to live a happy life. And that letter is the happiness equation.
I love that. I mean, there's something that kids bring into life that you just don't understand until you have them. And I mean, I have 2 children myself, and I mean, just feel the same way. My goodness. There was a quote in the book that you mentioned that I somehow hadn't heard before, and I love it. It's from Gandhi, and you mentioned that happiness is what you think, is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. That really struck me because I've been looking for a long time as somebody to say, what is happiness? How do you find happiness? And so thank you for including that quote. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think all of us are on the path towards trying to do that. It's not easy. Very few of us can say that what we do like I did the Walmart job for 10 years. I only quit recently, right? Like after 5 books were published, I literally was doing it I thought my parents always wanted me to be a doctor, really. Like
Mm-hmm.
they wanted me to be a lawyer. I already failed at that. Like the last thing I want to do is quit my day job and be an artist. Like that sounds like the worst thing for an East Indian family with conservative values. Like that sounds like oh, what does your son do? He's a cardiologist. What about your son? Oh, he sits in the basement and writes books. Ugh. So
Yeah.
I wasn't doing what Gandhi says. And I look into the research. It turns out none of us are. Most of us grew up with similar advice from our parents. And our parents say, do good work, then have a big success, then be happy. Right? They say study hard, get good grades, be a doctor. Work hard, get a promotion, be happy. And I don't know if you are guilty of this at all, Adam. I know I am. I'm like, I know this is wrong, but I'm like, oh, come on, we want you to get into a good school. We want you to get a good job. Like this is the thing we tell our kids. And unfortunately, from all the happiness research, we know it's actually backwards. It's not great work, big success, be happy. It's actually be happy leads to great work, leads to big success.
Mm-hmm.
So the challenge isn't how do we get to happiness? The question really is how do we start there? When you wake up in the morning and you have 1,000 minutes a day to be awake, what are a few simple little tools you can do in the first few minutes of your day to set your brain on a path to positive thinking? And that's what the research I did for the happiness equation was. And that's why the happiness equation is full of dispelling many of the commonly held myths that we all have about how we actually get to happiness, and instead saying, no, we need to start there. And here's how you can start there in the morning.
That's so good that you say be happy first, because yes, it's always what can I do to be happy? You reach it, then you set a new goal. And in the pre-interview again, I'll mention that we mentioned the word enough, and getting to that point where I think a lot of people are searching for the answer, what is enough? But it's only when you have enough that you can truly be happy. And what you just said reminds me of, in the book you mentioned, internal versus external motivators.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty myself saying that I do my work for other people, to impact other people, to better the world. And there's so many people who say that, but you come back and say, no, at some point you have to do work for yourself. So I'm not going to add any more to that. I'm just going to let you elaborate on that. And so what did you mean between internal versus external motivators, doing work for ourselves?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to just close the open loop I opened 2 minutes ago when I said you can do things in the morning. People are like, what are the things? I'm just going to drop a few. I won't elaborate on them.
Yeah.
Just for the people listening, it's like literally going on a nature walk, journaling for 20 minutes about a positive experience about your day, reading 20 pages of fiction. Okay, so these are just some of, I think I have 7 in the book, but these are just some of the practices. Now, zooming forward to your question about motivators, here's the problem with focusing on external motivators. You and I both have podcasts, right? Like I have a podcast. It's called 3 Books with Neil Pasricha.
Yep.
Every chapter of the show, I uncover and discuss the 3 most formative books of an inspiring person. I realize that there's no good way to discover new books. Like I don't trust the Amazon recommendation engine. It just feeds me the same 25 books over and over again. And so what I wanted to do is say, like, what if I sat down with like a David Sedaris or a Judy Blume or a Chris Anderson from TED, and I said, what 3 books changed your life? So I do that for me. That's for me. I am the guy who really wants to know what those books are, and I want to read them before I interview people. I want to get all kind of jacked about books, and that's for me. But the problem is the iTunes algorithm, again, there's that word, like I don't know how it works. All I know is that when I'm in the top 100 on iTunes, I get all these tweets and I get all these texts and I get people saying, wow, your podcast is doing great. And I feel good about myself, and I post it on Twitter and I'm like, woohoo, like, look at me. I'm in the top 100 on iTunes. And then, but you know what happens? Then I'm not in the top 100 on iTunes for the next like 3 weeks, and I feel like crap every single day because I'm like, I want to get back to that high. The problem is it's an external high. I cannot control whether I'm on it or not. Literally, there's nothing I can do. I don't even know what to do. I could try to learn how the algorithm works, and I could try to game it by timing my releases, but that's going down a path. That's a terrible path. That's like looking at your blog stats. That's like looking at your, how many likes you get on your picture on Instagram. Like, the tech companies have long figured out that when they alter unpredictably your reward pellets, you are more addicted to the rewards. Okay. So what I mean is, if you got 20 likes on every picture, you'd never check Instagram. But the fact that you can get 2 on some of them and 100 on others makes you check, check, check. Some people even say that they subvert the algorithms purposely to literally leak out the likes at different times to make you check more frequently. But that means that our brains are getting hijacked by an external or extrinsic motivator. My challenge to all the listeners and to you and to me, because I'm in the world too, I'm trying to fight this too, is how do we keep finding the intrinsic motivators that we literally want to do? So I want to read these 3 formative books. I will buy them. I will read them. I will interview the person. I will release the show. I will have no ads on it. I'm trying my best. I even have a Libsyn account for those who are into podcasting for my podcast, 3 books. And I don't even have the password to it. Only my assistant has the password, and I don't want to like harass her at 11 o'clock at night when I'm feeling low resilience and like want to check my stats. So I can't check my stats, right? I don't track CPMs. Or like the cost per 1,000 downloads because I don't have advertisers, so I don't have to track it. Yeah. So like, I'm trying to put in systems to keep making my motivators intrinsic, but the hard thing in the world today is we are so tempted by all the extrinsic motivators, and I'm not saying they're doing it purposely, but like, every company knows how to manage and manipulate those influences, right? They know what levers to pull to make us addicted to them.
While we're on the topic, talking about success and, what you measure, it goes back to defining what success means to all of us. And I haven't asked you yet. I mean, I can go ahead and ask you, how do you define success? And then have you found some ways or some tips that you can offer listeners on what they should be looking for in defining success? Because I think that's a really important part of all this. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And so, first of all, I think back to that triangle, right? And just to recall for people, it's sales on one corner, social on the other, and self on the third. Now, in the 3 Books podcast, okay, it's my new podcast. I want that very clearly to be self. I've got no ads on it, and I have no way to monetize it. I do not make any money on my podcast, okay? But on my speaking career, for example, that is sales. I use sales as the measure for that. I'm not speaking because I want claps. I'm speaking because I'd like to provide for my family.
Yeah, right.
And the funny thing about books, as you probably know, is that you bought the book, The Happiness Equation, it's on your shelf, and you read it. Well, everyone else wants the movie, right? Like, most people want the movie, and for a book, the speech is the movie, right? So on that one, I measure myself by sales. And then in terms of other things in my life, I might measure it by social. I might measure it by like how well I'm viewed by my peer group, as a sibling or as a father, or like, there's lots of things that I could think about in that world. So that's how I measure success. And then if you want to say, well, that's nice, Neil, it's a great model. What about you, Neil Pasricha, you the guy? Well, the sentence that I think about to answer this question, it's a bit revealing. Okay. So it's a bit revealing. But I'm going to do it. It's the first time I've talked about it. It's this sentence. Okay.
All right.
I want the impact of an enterprise with the life of an artist with FU money in the bank.
I love that. That's a good sentence.
Yeah, I think I won't say who I got that from, because I don't know if they would want their name attached to that. But I will say, like, I heard that sentence like a few weeks ago, and I was like, that's a good one. Like, I won't say that person's name for their sake. But I'm not copywriting that phrase. I didn't come up with it. So it's like, yeah, the impact. I want the impact of an enterprise with the lifestyle of an artist with FU money in the bank.
Hmm. That's
And
perfect.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And by the way, this gets back to my thing on side hustles, which we didn't talk about. But for 8 years concurrently, everything we've talked about so far was done on the side of my full time Walmart career,
Hmm.
right? So people always like I'd go to big conferences and like I'd go to like like a world domination summit that Chris Gillibo hosts every year, or like a TED event, and everyone would sort of be like entrepreneurs. They'd all be like individuals running businesses or artists running like their own art, and they'd be like, "Why do you work? Why are you so stupid that you work at Walmart?" And I always said to them, "You don't get it. For me, the fact that I work at Walmart makes me more courageous in my art. I don't
Oh
have to put
yeah.
ads on my blog. I don't have to worry about if my blog is popular or not because I have a full-time job. So this is just like for fun. And
Hmm.
that makes the art better. And then because my blog took off and I have the success of like book deals and some speeches and stuff, I'm like, that gives me more kind of confidence in my corporate job. I end up sort of being a little bit mouthy at meetings. I like ask the CEO questions. I like talk back to the executive. I speak truth to power. And you know when you do that in a company, what happens? They promote you. They love those. Not many people are willing to do that. So they're like, this guy should be an executive here. So I like literally was rising up at Walmart and I was rising up in my art because they were promoting each other. And so what I think, and I don't know, I know you're an entrepreneur, so like maybe you relate to this. It's like it's how many different cash flow legs you have on the table,
Oh yeah.
right? I was like,
Don't
I know,
ever think that people
yeah,
just do one thing. That's,
exactly.
I mean, that's
Keep going.
huge. And in this discussion, yeah, none of us do just one thing anymore. So take that off the table.
Exactly, and you shouldn't because that I saw this. My dad's a high school teacher, but in the summers he'd be like, "Hey Neil, you think we should like buy that little piece of land and like maybe build a building on it?" Like he was always doing something else, and the something else, the part that we always forget is it enables the other thing. Like
Yep.
it makes you more risk seeking in the opposite work because you can afford to be.
Exactly. There's smart risks and there's stupid risks. And when you have more cash flow, you can take, I mean, you can still take smart risk, but you have income coming in, and exactly what you explained there. But I mean, while we're on the topic of Walmart, like that's near and dear to my heart because as a kid, my dad managed Walmarts in the 70s and 80s, and
In Illinois or where?
no, and actually in Alabama, that's where I
Mhm.
am originally from. But
Right.
he quit when they went from original Walmarts to the super centers. They expected way more out of them, more hours and such. And so he stepped away at that time. But it brought in an income for our family for years. So, I mean, how was your time at Walmart while we're talking about it? What did you see about them as an organization while you were there?
Well, I loved it, and
Yeah.
the thing is, the company is the five people you sit beside in any
Mm-hmm.
company. So
Hmm.
when I say I loved it, I mean I loved my direct report. The people I managed were kind to me. We worked well as a team. We had good work life balance. And people always ask me, it's like, well, how did what did the company say when you started doing this like book thing on the side? And literally, I went to talk. Most companies do not let you do that. They don't take too kindly to you, also moonlighting outside of work. And so I went and talked to the head of corporate ethics at Walmart. Literally said, like, what should I do about this? He said, "Oh, it's really clear at Walmart. If it's not a conflict of interest, you're totally allowed." Because, as you know, many people who work at Walmart have more than one job, and so as long as it's not a conflict of interest, meaning that I wasn't like talking about Walmart secrets or I wasn't like selling the idea that I work at Walmart on stage, then it was totally fine. And so they gave me a lot of leash. And three times I tried to sort of like say, well, I should maybe do a little less here. And they were always like, no, how can we kind of make this work for you? So what I saw when I was inside Walmart was a group of people working together. And I don't think they would have grown into a $500 billion company, literally with 2.5 million employees if they weren't doing a lot of things right.
Yeah.
And what they did have right is you could speak truth to power. It's a full meritocracy. Many people in the room have master's degrees. Many people in the room never finished high school. The CEO of Walmart Canada, when I started working, was a never finished high school kind of guy. Like, he did not have fancy degrees. He literally was just a great, 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 smart, interesting person. And so when I say it was a meritocracy, I mean, like, in a meeting room as a junior person, which I was, my view was taken as seriously as an executive. And most companies have such brittle hierarchies inside them that they never get truth to the top. They never let new ideas propagate. They have they have big problems expanding internationally. And being entrepreneurial, they don't know what innovation means because they don't let the ideas properly percolate in hallways and in meeting rooms with everybody treated as equals. And Walmart did. And I think that's a huge reason why they're so successful.
That's really good insight as far as the brittle hierarchies. I mean, a lot of people just can't hear the truth, or they don't know the truth, or they don't care about the truth. But something, while we're talking about cash flow and money coming in, there was a part in the book where you broke down the Harvard MBA, the retail assistant manager, and the teacher. And I found that graph really interesting. At the end of the day, they all make the same money.
Mm-hmm.
And so that graph there, I don't know how long it took you to write the book, but that in itself is a lesson. Has that been shared widely on the internet? That seems like something that would go viral or something.
Yeah, people love that, and there are people who debate it, of course, as well. But what I'm trying to do in that graph is say the title of the chapter is "How do you make more money than a Harvard MBA?" And I show this table where I show that a Harvard MBA average exit salary. I take their average exit salary, $120,000 per year. I show that they work about 80 hours a week, and I compare this. I'm like, they're consultants, they're bankers, right? They're private equity, and then I compare it to a retail assistant manager, which is a Walmart assistant manager because I worked at Walmart, 70 grand a year, and how many hours they work, and then I compare it to a teacher, which is like 50 grand a year, depending where you're teaching, but less hours. And I show that we're all focused on this large number, which is called salary per year. But why are we measuring ourselves on this terrible numerator and denominator that bears no proxy to what our life actually looks like? Instead, we should be focused on a different number, which is dollars per hour. Every single job, from your part-time babysitting job when you're 12 years old all the way to your fancy executive job now, pays you on a dollar per hour basis. You simply take the numerator and divide it by the denominator. And the table is more complicated because I show hours per week and number of vacation days and stuff. But it turns out that all three of those jobs, the Harvard MBA, the retail assistant manager, and the teacher, all of them make $28 per hour. What I'm trying to prove in that chapter is that it's a sliding scale. You get to choose what your inputs are in terms of number of hours. You don't get to choose as easily as what your outputs are in terms of dollar per hour. You just choose to work more hours. So I'm saying overvalue yourself and don't choose the top salary that you want. Instead, choose the lifestyle that you want first and then adjust the dial accordingly. If you would like to have 13 weeks of vacation, as my wife has and my dad has, then you probably want to be a teacher because you get the summers off, and no other job gives you the summers off. So you could travel, or you could do real estate development like my dad did, or you could like go teach in China or whatever you want. But if you are like, no, I don't want to make 50 grand. Are you kidding me? Like, I want to make 200. Well, that's fine too. But let's remember that when you're, a middle man, you're a, say, senior consultant at McKinsey, you're in a hotel room in Milwaukee from Monday to Thursday. You're working the whole time.
Yeah.
So let's not make a mistake. Let's not pretend someone else is shoveling. Like, let's not pretend that you're taking care of your kids and shoveling your driveway at the same time, because you can't be doing that too.
Right. Superman. And there's tons of interesting stuff in this book, but that graph is just something that was like.
By the way, I can totally trash McKinsey consultants because A, I have lots of friends that work there, and B, they don't have time to listen to this podcast.
They're too busy doing like crunching numbers. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's so much interesting stuff in this book, and that graph just really grabbed me. But there's a lot more we could talk about. But kind of wrapping up here, I did want to touch on the subject of regret, because I can't remember if that's the last chapter. It's at least towards the end of the book. But some regrets that you found through your research. There were 5 top regrets that people got to the end of their lives and found regret. And a reason to live life to the full now and to find happiness and joy now is so we don't get to the end of our lives and have more regret than we do. I just found that really interesting. I kind of imagine y'all asking these people later in life and looking back. I'm in my 30s now, definitely not to that point, but the more older people that I talk to, they all have some sort of regret, and I just want to get to the end of life and have less of it. But I just want to kind of ask you, through your research there, if you want to talk a little bit about regret or the regrets that you found that kept repeating themselves, or your take on regret and how people can have less of it at the end of their life.
Sure. Well, first of all, a few times I've hinted at this idea that I've worked at Walmart while doing this art stuff on creating these books and so on. And then astute listeners will have noticed that I don't work at Walmart today. So they may have wondered, well, when did you quit and why? And how did you decide that? So I called up the CEO of the company. I'd worked for him for 4 years. I was his chief of staff, and I wrote his speeches and stuff like that. I called him. I was no longer working for him at the time. And I said, Dave, you're CEO of Walmart International. I'm thinking about quitting Walmart. Should I or shouldn't I? And how do I think about it? He said, Neil, you only got to do 2 tests. Number 1 is the Plan B test. What will you do if it fails? I said, oh, well, I guess I'll call Walmart up and get another job. And he's like, yeah, we'll probably hire you, right? Like it's not going to be that hard, or I'll go to a different company. And I said, what's the other test, Dave? And he says, the other test is the deathbed test. When you're laying on your deathbed, which of the choices will you regret doing the least? So I said, well, I know I'll regret it if I don't try to be a full-time author. Like, that seems way more interesting to try. I mean, I don't know if I could do it, but I'll try it. And he's like, yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. And so those 2 tests were incredible filters for anyone listening who's thinking about making a career move or a personal life change. Ask yourself those 2 questions. What's the Plan B? And what is the deathbed test? Okay. Now, you've hinted at the 5 regrets of the dying. So for those that don't know, a palliative care nurse, Bronnie Ware, ended up helping thousands of people die. And so she was, because she's in palliative care and I think worked at a hospice, she was with people on their last kind of minutes of life. And so she actually did something really interesting with that. She wrote a book and she put all the regrets together, and she said, these are the 5 things people regret the most when they're dying. And I'm going to read them for you now. And I know it's kind of near the close, so I'll let people think about these, because I read these like literally every 3 months. Number 1, I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me.
Hmm.
Number 2, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Number 3, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. Number 4, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And number 5, I wish I had let myself be happier. Many people don't realize till the end of their life that happiness is a choice, and the only person holding you back from it often is just you.
Wow. And what a way to wrap up this show again, Neil. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your wisdom, and I think definitely a way to help get to the end of your life and not have as much regret. If you haven't already read this book, I know probably a lot of people have, but The Happiness Equation is the book. Wonderful book it is. Last question for you, Neil. Where would you like to send people to find out more about you and your work?
I mean, the number one project I'm passionate about these days is 3 books, my podcast. So it's called 3 Books with Neil Pasricha. The website is 3books, the number 3, BOOKS.co. And if you're in a podcast app, which I bet you are because you're listening to this, whether that's the Apple podcast app or Stitcher or Google Play or whatever, just type it in. Give it a whirl. Let me know what you think. It's 3 books. Every chapter I uncover and discuss the 3 most formative books of an inspiring person. And it's my biggest passion right now.
All right. Everybody go take a listen. Again, thanks, Neil.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you got something out of these ideas. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.